This programming is brought to you by PS Lightwave, providing businesses with intranet, data circuits, private fiber, and VoIP over a 7-county fiber optic network and data center co-location services. pslightwave.com.
Local officials gained support from the courts for defying Governor Abbott's ban on mask mandates. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, the politics of masks and the latest on COVID-19 spread across the Houston area. We'll check in with the head of the Memorial Hermann Health System. Then we'll talk about a number of developments in the political world over the last 24 hours on masks and vaccinations, as well as the special session in Austin and passage of legislation Tuesday and again early this morning in Congress. Lots to dig into in our political roundup today with Mark Jones and Renee Cross. Also this hour, how area universities are preparing for their fall semesters amid the COVID fourth wave. Plus, we remember one of our semi-regular guests who passed away Tuesday, and we talk with an area fiction writer about her new novel. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7, then check in with the head of the Memorial Hermann Health System. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up, the politics of masks and vaccines and infrastructure and spending bills in Congress we discuss in our political roundup. Also, how area universities are navigating the fall semester amid COVID's fourth wave. First, though, as we just heard from News 88.7's Matt Harrop, Texas Children's Hospital is now requiring its employees to get vaccinated by September 21st, and St. Luke's Health has announced it's temporarily closing its Conroe freestanding ER and diverting staff to its hospital in the Woodlands, where the number of patients are way up and staffing is short. Want a silver lining? As we've been reporting for the first time in a few weeks, the Texas Medical Center is reporting a lower number of people hospitalized with COVID-19 in a single day compared to the previous week's daily average. We've been checking in with different hospital groups this week. Today, we welcome back Dr. David Callender, the president and CEO of the Memorial Hermann Hospital System. Dr. Callender, good morning.
Good morning.
What are you seeing as of this morning in Memorial Hermann hospitals?
Well, we're very busy. The number of hospitalized patients with COVID continues to go up. I know that the metric was down a couple of days ago, but it bounced right back up based on the most current information. So we're hopeful that in the coming days we'll begin to see the rate of acceleration for new cases and hospitalization slow down a bit. But right now, that hasn't yet happened.
I do wonder, the message has been out there the last few days at least that in many cases, if you don't have a life-threatening emergency, not to go to an emergency room. And I wonder if people are starting to heed that even as you say, the percentage of cases that are directly related to COVID go up.
Yeah, right now the emergency departments at all of our hospitals all across the city, whether it's Memorial Hermann, St. Luke's, all the others, are extraordinarily busy. So if you go, you're going to have a long wait. We certainly want people to come if they need care, they need help, but we just want people to understand that the wait may be a little longer than usual.
As of this morning, you have reinstated a no visitor policy across the system. Why?
Because we are so busy. Our staff are stretched, taking care of so many patients with COVID. Having visitors is something that we always desire. It's certainly good for the patients, but it also requires staff time, and it requires additional measures to make sure that the visitors as well as the patients remain safe. At this level of hospitalization, with our staff being so busy all across all of our care venues, it's just safest right now to limit visitation.
Does that mean absolutely no visitors, or will there be some, as you said, limited visitation, some limited exceptions?
We have special exceptions, for example, in the OB units, for births, for patients who are in a hospice situation. So we certainly do allow visitation in those situations, but in general, if you have a loved one in the hospital, you will not be admitted to see them during the course of the day.
I mentioned Texas Children's new vaccine requirement for employees. You did the same a couple of weeks ago. I assume you applaud Texas Children's decision?
Well, we think it's the right thing to do. You see, now I think we're in the thousands of health institutions across the country that are moving to mandatory vaccination. The associations like the American Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, the academic associations, all recommend mandatory vaccination for healthcare workers. So yes, we believe it's the right thing to do.
I also mentioned the staffing issue St. Luke's Health is dealing with. They're obviously not the only ones. We have heard similar concerns from Harris Health in recent days, as an example. What are you seeing? Are you in a situation where one Memorial Hermann Hospital needs more staff and another one can afford to have some diverted? Is that just part of the regular business of doing things, or what?
It is. The rates of hospitalization, the absolute volumes vary across the region. They vary among our hospitals because we are a large system. We do have the luxury of being able to move staff around, in some cases even move patients around to places where we have a bed that will accommodate their needs. This is a national problem. The COVID hospitalizations are up across the country. We have the temporary staffing agencies that are paying large amounts of dollars to get people to leave their job, come work in a temporary situation that's very attractive to a young person who's interested in cash compensation. So there's been a staffing shortage in healthcare for a long time. Certainly the current COVID situation is making that more acute.
And what is that situation specifically, though, for you and your hospital group?
Well, right now we have capacity. We're able to staff our beds. We're able to provide care to patients who are coming for hospitalization. Waits are a bit longer. If a patient needs admission, then they have to wait in the emergency department for up to a day to get into a hospital bed. But we're not at the limits of staffing, but we don't want to get there either. We don't want to be like our colleagues in Louisiana, who essentially have said, I'm sorry, if you need our care today, we're not going to be able to get to you. Do not have a severe car accident. Do not fall off a ladder because you may not be able to get care. We certainly want to avoid that here in Houston if we can.
We last spoke with you 2 weeks ago today. How would you characterize what's changed just in those 2 weeks?
Well, again, the numbers of cases have just exploded really since the 1st of July. We've continued to see that rapid rise on a daily basis in the number of new cases as well as the need for hospitalizations. The one significant difference in this surge compared to the 3 previous ones is that the average age of the patient presenting with severe illness is much younger. So the average age of people in our hospitals with severe cases of COVID today is mid-30s. It was mid-50s previously. So I just want to try to bust the myth that young people don't get severely ill with COVID. That is not true.
Yeah, to that end, we're hearing there have been increases in the number of pediatric patients in hospitals across Texas. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex situation. We're certainly seeing more children coming to the hospital with severe cases of COVID than we have in the previous months. But the other thing that's happening is we're seeing an explosion of other respiratory viruses like respiratory syncytial virus. Respiratory syncytial virus causes a significant compromise of the lungs in some young people, requires them to come into the hospital for oxygen support, in some cases ICU levels of care. So the combination of an increased demand for COVID care as well as significantly increased demand for respiratory care for children with other respiratory viruses is leading to filled hospital beds and ICU beds and limits in capacity all across the state.
Do you know what's caused that increase in respiratory viruses?
Well, what we think has happened is, for a while, the children were home. They weren't in schools. We didn't see the sort of normal circulation of respiratory viruses. And we think that they mutated a little bit. They changed a little bit to make them a little more aggressive. Because children weren't exposed, we didn't have the base level of immunity in the community and communities around the state that we typically would see. So that's just made children a little bit more susceptible. And we've got a little bit more aggressive virus variant circulating out there right now. So just a combination of factors led us to this situation.
Yeah, that has got to be frustrating because on the one hand, you think, well, the best thing to do over the course of the last year and a half of this pandemic is where possible to physically distance, and that includes kids, particularly those who can't get vaccinated. And then at the same time, that distance and spending so much time at home, indoors, if it means they can't build up immunity to other things, then that becomes a problem.
Yeah, certainly. And, let me just emphasize the importance of masking, because certainly, we're starting to school. We know there are issues with mask mandates and the like. We know some school districts are moving forward with masking requirements. Right now, because of these circulating respiratory viruses and because of the risk of COVID, we're advising that all children wear a mask to school. And we know some parents are concerned about that. We understand that. But with everything that's happening right now, the best way to protect your child and keep them out of a situation where they might need hospital care is have them wear a mask to school.
Dr. David Callender is the president and CEO of the Memorial Hermann Hospital System. Dr. Callender, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Up next, the politics of masks and vaccines, steps forward for spending bills in Congress, and the fate of the second special session. Our political roundup is next as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Local officials are issuing mask mandates upheld in two separate lawsuits challenging Governor Abbott's order banning them. The Texas House Speaker signed arrest warrants for Houston Democrats who broke quorum to block a controversial election bill, and the Texas Supreme Court says law enforcement can go get them. And the U.S. Senate passed an infrastructure bill yesterday and the framework for a huge spending bill early this morning. Will we even have time to talk about New York's governor? We discuss the latest developments in politics in this week's Roundup now with the University of Houston's Renee Cross and Rice University's Mark Jones. Renee, Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Craig.
So lots happening. Let's get into it. First, Texas judges in two separate lawsuits say officials in Bexar and Dallas counties can issue mask mandates despite Governor Abbott's order banning them. Bexar County health officials already requiring masks in public schools. A similar announcement's expected in Dallas. And here, the Houston ISD board is set to vote on a mandate at its meeting tomorrow night, following similar requirements in Dallas and Austin schools announced on Monday. And Harris County leaders Tuesday approved the county the county attorney's request to take legal action against the state of Texas over Governor Abbott's orders banning both mask and vaccine mandates. That vote was 3-2 along party lines. All right, Mark, what do you make of these developments?
Well, they aren't really surprising in that we're talking about Bexar County district judges and Dallas County district judges who are Democrats supporting local Democrats in their desire to have mask mandates. The most likely scenario is that those court decisions are going to be overturned by the all-Republican Texas Supreme Court, who will side with Governor Abbott and his emergency powers, giving him the right to ban the use of masks in these local jurisdictions. In the end, Texas is not a federal state. It's a unitary state where all gets decided in Austin, and the counties and school districts and cities really can only do what the state allows them to do. In this case, Governor Abbott is not allowing them to impose mask mandates.
Renee Cross, what do you think? Are we seeing cracks in the monolithic authority of the governor's office, or will the Texas Supreme Court simply step in on this?
I think the Supreme Court will step in and support Governor Abbott, just as Mark said. However, the longer and longer this goes on, and more independent school districts want to enact these mask mandates, whether it's in urban areas like Houston or Dallas, or even in suburban areas, I think at some point, Governor Abbott is going to lose the battle of public opinion. There just seems to be too many families, parents that do want this. And so I'm not so sure that this particular move will play well in some of those swing districts next year.
Yeah, Mark, is that your read of it as well?
Well, I think certainly the governor is taking a calculated risk. If the Delta variant is severe and things start to get worse, he's effectively painting himself into a corner where if he reverses his position on mask mandates, he's going to enrage the Republican base who he needs to face in a primary in the coming spring, most likely in March if we're not delayed. And right now, I think he's more focused on that primary in March than he is on the November general election in 2022, based on the belief that by then, hopefully from his perspective, this is essentially blown over and he's won his Republican primary by a large number. are a large proportion, reinforcing his leadership of the Texas GOP.
Renee, I imagine there are some local officials who are saying, well, he shouldn't be paying any attention to the primary or the general election when it comes to something like this.
Well, of course. But of course, both sides are going to be looking at this come election time. I think one thing to note is that this particular decision by Abbott is yet another example of the Republican Party, who traditionally has always supported local control, is increasingly not supporting local control. And on the flip side, the Democratic Party, who generally believes in a strong centralized government, is clamoring for local control. So these are definitely interesting political times.
Well, and I don't know that that's necessarily connected, Mark, to, strictly speaking, the pandemic. I think we could probably find a number of examples of that in recent years, and that kind of
absolutely,
makes sense. Mark Jones, is it part of just the math of a state government run by Republicans and local municipalities, particularly big cities, run by Democrats, that the state versus local argument is going to flip?
That's exactly the case. And so we've seen that over fracking bans in Denton County, bag bans in cities across the state, bans on ride sharing like Uber and Lyft. In all those cases, we've seen the state government step in to support the more Republican position over the objection of the Democratic position in the blue cities and counties like Houston, Austin, and Travis and Harris.
And I guess then, and I don't want to kind of circle around the same terrain here, but Renee, I guess it still kind of comes down to this question of whether you're talking about the Texas Supreme Court or any other court authority, whether or not it would characterize these circumstances and questions of public safety as something different from those issues.
I think that's true. Like Mark said, we've been seeing this pattern now for a number of years, whether it's plastic bags in municipalities or fracking or so forth. However, those don't rise to the level of a pandemic, and particularly children's safety. So I do think this one is a little bit different.
Mark, Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan has signed civil arrest warrants for House Democrats who fled the state in order to break quorum and stop a controversial election bill from being voted on. The move came after the all-Republican state Supreme Court said law enforcement can round up the lawmakers and bring them back to the state capitol's House chambers. Does this make it more or less likely now for Democrats to return?
Well, I think it makes it more likely. We're already several Democrats have returned, and so in the most recent quorum call, we were at 93. That's only 7 short of the 100 that are needed to actually begin to hold session in the House. This probably pushes a few Democrats who are already on the fence and pretty much wanting to come back to Texas, wanting to come back to Austin, and essentially trying to work within the system. This probably provides them with a little bit of a push. But the reality is you only need a small push because Dade Phelan's only 7 Democrats short. He should be able to get those Democrats into the chamber in Austin, either by force or just by essentially their own volition, either later this week or early next week. And I would expect the Texas House to begin sessioning with, if not everyone, most everyone, by next week.
Renee, I wonder if that math would change at all if another state came along, or the District of Columbia for that matter, and said, we don't recognize Texas law enforcement authority to return these folks. Couldn't they then stay away indefinitely?
Well, like Mark said, quite a few have already returned to Texas. From the last count I saw, there's approximately 20 that may be still in D.C. Again, Texas law enforcement can't do anything outside of the state. However, there is a considerable number, and like Mark said, they only need 7, so they can start rounding those folks up here in Texas and taking them back to the chamber.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're talking with political analysts Renee Cross from the University of Houston and Mark Jones from Rice University about recent developments in politics. All right, from all the posturing, let's turn now to actual legislation. The U.S. Senate, Mark Jones, voted 69-30 to approve a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. If it passed the Senate by such numbers, it should sail through the House, right?
Well, in theory, yes. In practice, no. In part because of the position of many Democratic progressives who are effectively saying that they don't want to touch the infrastructure bill until they actually see the budget bill pass. They want to tie those two together, and they're upset with the sort of trimmed down infrastructure bill, and so their goal is to hold the infrastructure bill hostage until the budget plan is actually passed. And so the real question for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is, does she want to yield to the progressives, or does she want to try to forge something between the moderates and Republicans to get it passed? Odds are we may have to wait until September when the budget plan finally reaches its way out of the Senate and into the House to actually have the vote on the infrastructure bill if Democratic progressives in the House get their way.
Yeah, Renee, the Senate passed that $3.5 trillion budget blueprint early this morning on a 50-49 party line vote. It includes significant money for education, healthcare, climate change, and other provisions that lack any GOP support. What do you see as happening next?
Well, first of all, they needed to pass that resolution to essentially start the reconciliation process if that is the way they go. I think Democrats are going to have to do a really, really good job at explaining exactly what this includes. I mean, there's a lot of programs that are very popular within this proposal, whether it's expanded access to health care, expanded Medicaid benefits, including vision and dental, some help with 2 years of college, so on and so on. These are popular programs with the public. So they're going to have to really sell this. Going back to what the House is going to do, the progressives need to be careful. I think they should take the infrastructure bipartisan bill and run with it, put it down as a success, and start working towards coming to a compromise, which I know is a dirty word, on the $3.5 trillion bill.
Mark, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced he's resigning in 2 weeks' time amid an investigation finding he sexually harassed multiple women. Cuomo didn't exactly own up to that in his announcement, though, did he?
No, I mean, given Andrew Cuomo and everything that we know about him from his past, it was unlikely he was ever going to own up to any of this. He effectively was trying to still engage in the hustle in the last days of his administration. He's given himself, in fact, 2 more weeks, in part to try to sort of maybe change the narrative, or at least to stay in power for at least 2 more weeks. That's upset a lot of people. That Attorney General's report that Cuomo initially himself sort of pushed for was very damning, with 11 women with very credible stories of inappropriate and criminal behavior by Governor Cuomo. So he's gone, and with him, that's a real star within power broker within the National Democratic Party is gone. Someone who, had this not occurred, would have easily been elected to a record 4th term, which he would have then eclipsed his father, Governor Mario Cuomo, who served 3 terms as New York's governor.
Renee, his departure means the Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, becomes New York State's new first female governor. What should we know about her?
Well, for one thing, I think she's about the polar opposite of Cuomo in every way. Has a long-term career in public service. She actually started as an aide to Daniel Moynihan, popular senator of New York. She won a congressional seat in Western New York, beating. And actually, it was a conservative district, and it was vacated by a Republican congressional member who resigned due to some sexual allegations of his own. Um,
Wow. So she's been through this before, is what you're saying.
yeah, she may be the perfect person for this. And prior to that, she served in local government for 18 years. So this is certainly a seasoned professional. However, she's always seemed to stay under the radar. I think she's known as a hardworking, smart individual. And although she ran and won with Cuomo in 2014 and 2018, I don't think she's necessarily viewed as being tied at the hip with him. And as a lieutenant governor in New York, that position is much more ceremonial, say, than our lieutenant governor here in Texas, and which I think actually is a good thing because there's not a whole lot of negative baggage to connect her to, and she very quickly came out and said she believed the women after that long report that came out. So I think she's probably just the person New York needs right now. They need someone that's considered steady, and I would assume they're pretty much tired of men behaving badly in office.
Renee Cross is a senior director and researcher at the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. Mark Jones is a political science fellow at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. Renee, Mark, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Craig.
And just ahead, how area universities are navigating vaccines, masks, testing, and the upcoming fall semester. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. As I mentioned earlier, on Tuesday's show, we talked with HISD's new superintendent about the possibility that Houston students and teachers will be required to wear masks this coming semester. That will be determined at Thursday night's HISD board meeting. Houston universities have already determined their COVID protocols for returning students and faculty, and we're finding differences between mask policies and whether vaccination status is a factor for campus access. Joining us to discuss are Dr. Stephen Spann, the founding dean of the UH College of Medicine and vice president for medical affairs at the University of Houston, and Jerish Akash, director of institutional crisis management at Rice University. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Spann, let me start with you. UH Chancellor Renu Khator just sent out an email yesterday addressing some of what the university has planned as the fall semester begins. Can you summarize for us some of the planned safety protocols and procedures that students, faculty, and staff may find as they return to campus?
Yes, happy to do so. We are strongly encouraging personal responsibility to keep us all safe. Strongly encouraging everyone to wear masks in public indoor settings, putting signs around our buildings to encourage that. We are, of course, encouraging everyone to get vaccinated. If they haven't been vaccinated, we'll have a vaccination clinic on campus on next Monday, the 16th. We are also strongly encouraging people who are unvaccinated to get tested for COVID on a weekly basis at our free testing curative kiosk here on campus. So really strongly encouraging folks to follow the guidelines to keep us all safe.
Jerish Akash, how are plans at Rice similar and how are they different?
That's a great question. I can't speak for the University of Houston, but I can speak for what we're doing at Rice. And I think they're more similar than they are different. And we collaborate on an emergency management level quite thoroughly in the city of Houston. But what we're doing for Rice is similar in that we have a vaccine requirement, and we invite people to participate in that requirement. So we have good vaccination rates. We hope that when the rest of our vaccine surveys come in, that we'll be right at the 90% vaccination rate. So we're really happy with that. We have a complete infection control program, and that includes surveillance testing, a public information campaign on just general good disease hygiene requirements. We have surveillance testing that is quite vast, and we are exceptionally happy with our testing providers that from the Houston Methodist and from Baylor College of Medicine that help us with testing. We have a contact tracing team. We thoroughly contact trace all of our cases that come through. We've been doing that for about a year and a half. Our team is really good at it at this point. We provide isolation and quarantine guidance and housing. We have health services for students on campus and vaccine clinics, of course, that I've mentioned. A lot of policy changes, and I think what makes us most unique is that we try and stay really nimble. It's important that we understand what's going on around us and that we respond both at the policy and the operational level regularly.
Dr. Spann, obviously one distinction between the University of Houston and Rice is that Rice is a private university, UH is a public university, and that means, among other things, that at least at the moment, the University of Houston's not allowed to mandate that student, faculty, and staff be vaccinated, correct?
That is correct. However, we are implementing a new incentive program to, again, encourage and incentivize our folks to get vaccinated. So every faculty member, staff member, student who shows proof of their vaccination will receive an incentive of $50 in Shasta bucks. Those are funds that can be spent on campus for food or in the bookstore or whatever as an incentive. In addition to that, we will provide a smaller incentive, $2 per test, to everyone who gets tested in an effort to really encourage folks to do the surveillance testing. As previously mentioned. So we're trying to find creative ways to really not only encourage but incentivize our community to follow these guidelines.
Dr. Spann, are there procedures in place to quarantine anyone who does test positive?
Oh, absolutely. We have our dormitories have set aside rooms such that any students living on campus can be isolated according to the CDC guidelines.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're discussing how the University of Houston and Rice University are preparing for the fall semester amid COVID's fourth wave. We welcome your questions and comments for Dr. Stephen Spann from the University of Houston and Jerusha Cash from Rice at 713-440-8870 or talk@houstonmatters.org. Jerusha, can students be asked about their vaccination status, or is that moot because, as you said, you're requiring it?
So it's not moot. We do ask. We have a vaccine survey that we send out, and we ask students to tell us their vaccination status. And how that works is that it helps us manage our surveillance testing. So those who are not vaccinated are asked to be COVID tested more frequently than those that have been vaccinated. So it helps us understand where we are in our population as we look at the surveillance testing and really get an idea of how that virus is moving through not just our Rice population, but the entire community that crosses our borders in the campus.
Jerusha, you noted that you have the ability to be nimble and to sort of adjust on the fly. Are there any likely limitations in the fall semester at the moment on traditional student activities?
There are, we have a policy team that continually assesses and discusses and looks at the situation and makes decisions about gathering sizes. Where are we now? Where do we need to be based on what the virus is doing in the community? So that policy team meets twice a week, and they're looking very carefully about our cases. So our incident management team, our crisis management team just reactivated And so to handle the fall semester, and that means that when we start our surveillance testing, all of our testing numbers and infection rates and vaccine rates are freely for anyone to see on our dashboard. And we use that to make decisions, good policy decisions about what's happening immediately in our campus, so that we know if gathering sizes are too large, if there's too much COVID on the campus, then we modify that policy based on the information and data analysis that we see from our surveillance testing.
Let's take a call. We have Fernando on the line from Tomball. Fernando, what's your question?
Good morning. I wanted to ask if the U of H is going to revise the policy for intermittent grading. I know they had it for previous semesters, but I was wondering if they were going to make any adjustments in the future for this fall 2021 and maybe spring as well.
Okay, thanks very much for the call and for the question. So, Dr. Span, any changes in pass-fail policies, anything else for anyone who gets sick with COVID?
At this point, there has not been a decision to go to pass-fail. We at this point believe that the grading system will be as usual for non-COVID times. As our colleagues at Rice, we have a senior leadership team that meets at least on a weekly basis to review everything going on campus in terms of COVID. We monitor the number of cases. We have very excellent contact tracing. We can trace any outbreaks that occur in say a dorm or a classroom. We also have planned for the first 2 weeks of class to allow faculty some flexibility in terms of how many students will be in the classroom. So for the first 2 weeks, at least, students will have the option of coming to class or participating virtually, so that we ensure that there's plenty of opportunity for social distancing within the classroom. The goal is that students would attend each class at least once a week. But we'll be monitoring all of these conditions, the data very closely, so that we can, again, pivot, respond appropriately to the changing situation.
Dr. Stephen Span is the founding dean of the College of Medicine and vice president for medical affairs at the University of Houston. Jara Shakash is director of crisis management at Rice University. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Still to come, college friends tied to a brutal crime return to campus for their 10-year reunion. What could go wrong? A Houston writer's new suspense novel unfolds from there. We talk with her as Houston Matters continues. One of our occasional Houston Matters guests and an all-around good guy, Court McMurray, died Tuesday. He was a regular contributor to the Houston Chronicle's Gray Matters and a go-to option for us on a number of occasions for those topics on this show for which there often were no obvious go-tos, like what it means to be a Houstonian. Here's how he defined it on our show in 2016.
I think Houstonians are affably aloof. It is an incredibly friendly city, much more friendly than, say, cities in the Northeast where people tend to be a lot more aggressive, but we tend to stick to ourselves. There's a distance, and I think part of that is a function of the size of the city. What it means to be a Houstonian in Kingwood, which is part of Houston, is very different than what it means to be a Houstonian in Sunnyside. We all get along, but we do tend to keep our distance from one another.
We returned to that concept with Court in 2017 when I asked him how we could make this sprawling metropolis of Houston feel a bit smaller and more intimate.
One of the first things you have to do is embrace the size. You can't avoid it, and you have to embrace it. It's not an accident that every time we do one of these shows and it's pet peeves, the main peeve is traffic related.
Right.
Most of our experience is driving to someplace. It's work to home, home to work, and we tend to cocoon ourselves in places. And when you do that, when you choose your home theater over your trip to the movie theater, when you choose to watch the game on TV instead of going to the stadium, the town gets overwhelmingly big. And you start to believe every single myth and rumor about the danger and about the problems, and you start to distrust people. You have to embrace the size. You have to get out there and be with other people.
Court McMurray in 2017. Later that year, he joined us in the midst of Hurricane Harvey to discuss what the rest of the world misunderstood about Houston and what we were going through. He said then that non-Houstonians should prepare for the aftermath of Harvey, which he said was, quote, going to grab you by the lapels and shake you till you're cross-eyed. He had a way with words. In one of his final posts on social media, Court wrote, I believe with every fiber of my being that there is a purpose to life. I believe, he said, that every single one of us, even the worst of us, has value and merit and is deserving of love. He was a sharp wit and a kind and gentle man who called this program one of those little gifts that makes the city a decent place to live. Well, Court McMurray was one of those gifts as well. Our condolences go out to his family, friends, and colleagues. You're listening to Houston Matters. High school and college reunions are awkward enough, what with all the sizing up of each other's lives and achievements and all, but then add a heinous crime to the background and the experience gets even more intense. That's the setup for a new suspense novel from Houstonian Ashley Winstead called In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, a dark thriller that's also rife with introspection about life choices. Winstead tells Houston Matters' Michael Haggerty the story follows a group of 6 friends going back to campus for a college reunion.
And the thing about this group of friends is that 10 years ago, their senior year of college, one of their friend group was found brutally murdered, and another one of their friends was accused but never convicted of that crime. Of course, everyone still believes that that person actually did it, just never was brought to justice. They've all gone off to do some pretty extraordinary things. They're coming back to campus with a ton of different agendas, but none is more ambitious than Jessica Miller's, our main characters, who is obsessed with going back to homecoming because she thinks it's going to be a triumphant moment in her life. She thinks that she's going to be able to come back and show everyone this brand new, successful, beautiful, enviable person that she has made herself into since college because she felt very overlooked in college, among other things. So she has these big dreams about the weekend. And unfortunately for her and everyone, the weekend quickly goes very sideways.
As any reunion, a high school, a college one, any sort of reunion, you're nervous about what you're going to look like and how to. There's a lot that goes into a normal one, but one where a murder is at the heart adds a little more pressure to the. It's already a kind of an awkward scenario.
Yes, like who got cooler and more attractive, but who's the murderer hiding behind the mask is the extra element here.
Yeah, that's right. Who's got the coolest job and who's in an orange jumpsuit? So Jessica Miller, you said she's kind of been trying to change her vibe going into this and make an impression, different kind of impression. Tell me about her.
So she is someone who grew up really believing, because of her family, the example set by her dad in particular, that you earn love by being successful, by being a lovable person. And how her family has defined that for her is that she gets good grades and lives up to her father's legacy. And so in her mind, she wants to be this valuable, successful person. To her, that is like directly equivalent to both love and power. So unfortunately for Jessica, she is the most mediocre person in everything she does. It was really important for me to write a character who was a striver and who tried really, really hard at things, but never achieved them. And I think that is an experience that a lot of people have. It's like, to Jessica, a thing that upsets her is she's not even like unique enough to be at the bottom of anything, let alone the top. She's just always in the middle, like forgettable, invisible. And this creates quite a complex for her, where she's just highly motivated to stand out. And now she's very excited to go back and say, like, look at me, look what I've done, look who I am.
What kinds of things can a character learn about themselves in that kind of situation?
Well, Jessica learns a lot over the course of the book, and she doesn't want any of these lessons, but they're forced upon her. And in fact, it's not just Jessica. Each of the characters in the friend group goes through a very tumultuous weekend in which they're all revealing things about themselves, learning things about themselves. But Jessica is this, I'll leave it up to readers to decide if she's likable or not. And my bet is that she's an unlikable character. I hope, though, that she's compelling and she's undeniably tragic, because the things she wants most in the world are things that she can never have, right? She can never be this fantasy, because even the people she looked at to emulate weren't really what they were fronting to be. So that is a fantasy. And she is so desirous of recapturing her college experience and like turning the like dials of time back to relive what to her was, yes, a really hard moment, but also the moment in her life that was the most full of potential, where her life could have gone in any different direction. So of course that is tragic, because you can't ever have the past back. You can't relive. And I think she, goes back thinking she's going to show off this amazing, perfect person that she is. And she goes back and is almost unmasked for the true person she is and has been in the past and the things she's done.
I mean, you wrote this roughly 10 years after your own college graduation. So I got to ask, I mean, hopefully you didn't kill anyone, but you...
I'll never tell.
Yes. How did this, obviously, like reflecting on this fictional character and her memories of college and what could have been, should have been, what was good and what was bad, did it reshape or affect your thinking about your own college experience as you're reflecting on this fictional one?
100%. I actually started writing this book after attending my own 10-year college reunion. It was months later. I think I needed the seeds of that experience to kind of just take root in the back of my mind. But I went to my 10-year college reunion. I went to a school very much like the one I depict, the fictional school here. And I was so underwhelmed by my reunion, not because of anything, like the college campus was still wonderful and beautiful and exciting, but it was me. Like, I went with so much anticipation. All of my friends were going. It was going to be this brilliant experience, and I expected to feel the way I did when I first set foot on campus when I was a freshman. I was the first person in my family to go to college, so it was like this big group achievement. We, family and friends and my parents, and I mythologized college both before, during, and after. It was a very magical place for me, kind of identity forming. And so I've held on to this idea for 10 years that college was the best time in my life and that I would move back in a heartbeat. And so, of course, I was so excited to go back, and I walked around and nothing felt the way that it felt. The magic wasn't there. I actually broke away from all of the people who were celebrating in the homecoming parade and everything to walk by myself around campus, go back to my freshman dorm. And I was wondering to myself, why doesn't this feel the same way? Why do I feel grief? And it took me months to figure out that I was grieving a version of myself and a part of my story that I would never get back. And more than that, like, couldn't access anymore. So that really started the wheels turning for this book.
You mind if I ask, I mean, what part of yourself did you feel like you left behind besides youthful inexperience, I guess?
In a similar way to Jessica, a moment in time where all of my life lay ahead of me and I could do and be anyone. So many paths were there. A freer version of myself, a more carefree version of myself, one less beset by, anxiety and all of the kind of like struggles that you just confront as an adult when you have bills to pay and rent to make and job decisions. But just this beautiful bubble of time that I was in, I miss that version of myself. And I think in the process of writing this book, and this is a great thing about being a writer, I found, is that I am not these characters. I have done, almost none of the things that they, and I will not say which is which, but none of the things that they've done. But in writing this and having empathy for them, I have found empathy for myself and my past self especially.
Houston writer Ashley Winstead talking about her new novel, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. She spoke with our own Michael Haggerty. And that'll do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Ruiz, and Troy Schultz. David Pittman's our technical director. Remember to join Ernie Manous for Town Square today for more about back to school amid COVID, including your questions. That's at 3 o'clock on News 88.7. On tomorrow's show, more on COVID in Houston, of course. Also, did you know there's a wobble in the moon's orbit? It's normal, it's natural, it's happened before. It also affects the Earth's tides. We find out what it could mean for the Gulf Coast in the coming decades. Plus, did you miss synchronized swimming in the Tokyo Olympics? Maybe you were looking in the wrong place. We'll explain. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.